Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight on this Tuesday, June 25th.
Today, we're hitting the reset button on the war on drugs.
It's official now, legal recreational weed is coming to Illinois. Hear from Illinois Comptroller Susana Mendoza on the state's big but improving backlog of bills. Could Chicago see an uptick in immigration raids like these as President Trump spars with Congress over border funding?
The real dilemma posed by reparations is just that, a dilemma of inheritance.
The case for reparations, what could they look like, and what is the state of the opposition?
Although some gardens are struggling, this garden is thriving.
Yeah. Just what to do about all that rain. Jeannie Nolan is back with another dispatch from Organic Garden. Why University of Chicago researchers are stoked by what they've discovered about this slithering little creature called a hydra.
Over 500,000 bricks and over 4,000 hours of build time.
Those are some Lego bricks inside the new exhibition at the Morton Arboretum. All that and more next on Chicago Tonight. Thanks for joining us. I'm Paris Schutz. Here's what's making news in Chicago tonight. Surprise, Tony Preckwinkle is reportedly not ready to hang it up anytime soon. The Sun-Times reports that Cook County Board President Preckwinkle held a fundraiser this afternoon with the intent of running for re-election to her current post in 2022. This reverses her previous statement saying that this would be her last term. Preckwinkle ran for Chicago mayor and lost in a runoff in April to Lori Lightfoot. This was just months after she soundly defeated Bob Fioretti for County Board President. She has served in that role since 2010. A controversial police training academy may cost significantly more than the $95 million price it was originally tabbed at. That is according to Mayor Lori Lightfoot. She didn't put a specific number on this project, only saying she wanted to get it right. She says that other city departments will train there as well. An ordinance paving the way for this academy passed as one of Mayor Rahm Emanuel's final acts as mayor. Some good news if you're fed up with all those spam calls. The Illinois Attorney General and the Federal Trade Commission are announcing a crackdown on illegal robocalls. They say they're going after companies responsible for more than 1 billion robocalls every year, pitching things from money-making opportunities to interest rate reduction schemes. The FTC says consumers should take action every time they get a suspicious-sounding robocall.
Hang up on the calls. Get call blocking for your personal lines, and if you do get a call from an illegal robocall, report it to the FTC at ftc.gov/complaint.
A Cook County jail detainee is charged with trying to hire a hitman to kill 2 people associated with his criminal case. 21-year-old Trevon Clark was allegedly caught in an undercover sting offering $5,000 in this murder-for-hire plot. That's according to Cook County Sheriff Tom Dart. Clark is charged with 4 felony counts and was denied bond by a judge in Cook County Court today. As for the weather, partly cloudy with a low around 65 this evening, and then sunny and a high of 86 with no rain in the forecast, but don't hold me to that. Rain or shine, legal weed is on its way. Illinois is officially the 11th state to legalize the sale and possession of recreational cannabis, but it's the first state to have gotten to this point via legislation rather than a referendum. Chicago Tonight's Amanda Vinicki is here with the details. Amanda, what do you know?
Paris, it took years of negotiations, hours and hours of debate, a change in public perception. Polls now show that people are more accepting of pot, culminating in Governor Pritzker today signing a law to legalize marijuana in Illinois.
As the first state in the nation to fully legalize adult use cannabis through the legislative process, Illinois exemplifies the best of democracy, a bipartisan and deep commitment to better the lives of all of our people. Legalization of adult use cannabis brings an important and overdue change to our state, and it's the right thing to do.
That does not mean it's legal to start smoking, vaping, or otherwise using pot right away. Only state-approved and registered medical patients can legally buy and use marijuana now. The market does not open to everyone else until January 1st. Even then, not to everyone, no kids or teens, just adults. And in this bill, that is defined as anyone age 21 or older.
So how much will adults be able to legally buy?
Illinois residents will be permitted to have up to 30 grams that they can possess of the cannabis flower or buds. Anyone who does not live in the state, so tourists, can legally possess half that. The only exception is for medical marijuana patients who, under certain conditions, can have more. It's hard to tell what impact this will have on the illegal drug market, but everyone is supposed to buy their marijuana from state-licensed dispensaries. They function almost like pharmacies. They are to be supplied with pot by state-licensed growers, which is to say, even when marijuana is legal in Illinois, it will still be tightly regulated.
This is about repairing harm that's been done to communities for the last 40 years as a part of the failed war on drugs. And after 40 years of treating entire communities like criminals, here comes this multi-billion-dollar industry, and guess what? Black and brown people have been put at the very center of this policy in a way that no other state in the country has ever done this before.
Amanda, what does she mean by that statement?
So, Paris, well, many proponents of pot just see this as legalization law. Pritzker and his allies at this morning's bill signing ceremony focused on the social impact and justice aspects of it. The governor's office touts it as the most equity-centric law in the U.S. A quarter of all of the revenue from the marijuana program will be invested in communities impacted most by the war on drugs. Another 20% will be spent on substance abuse and mental health.
Black and white people tend to use cannabis at the same rates, but black people are far more likely to be arrested for possession.
In the past, people with criminal records may have gotten docked or lost the chance for a job. In this case, applicants competing to get a state license to sell marijuana will literally get extra points when owners and employees have been arrested or convicted of pot possession. Applicants also get a leg up if owners and workers reside in areas disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs. Typically, those are low-income minority neighborhoods.
Cannabis legalization has meant in this country before today was that wealthy white men would get rich and black men would get arrested. They would get arrested, they would be incarcerated, and they would be forced to live in permanent second-class citizenship because of convictions.
And so the law also sets forth a way for people who have been arrested or convicted of low-level drug possession to have those records cleared and expunged.
Man, it's no secret that the state wants a piece of the revenue pie here. How much can the state expect to bring in this first year?
Businesses will have to pay Illinois for those dispensary and cultivation licenses, so we'll get revenue from that. And then there's also the sales tax that people will pay when they buy weed. The Pritzker administration estimates $140 million in tax revenue for the program's first year, but estimates that that is going to ramp up to more than $300 million annually in a few years as the program matures.
Amanda, thank you very much. And on our website, check out our story on Chicago public schools who are taking a new look at punishments for marijuana and substance abuse. That's at WTTW.com/news. And up next, Illinois Comptroller Susana Mendoza on the billion-dollar bill backlog, so don't go anywhere.
Don't miss one of our stories. Get them all delivered to your desktop or mobile device with a subscription to the WTTW News Daily Briefing. Go to WTTW.com/daily briefing and sign up.
The job of Illinois Comptroller has not been the easiest task in recent years, trying to figure out how and when the state will pay the folks it owes for services. That was amid a backdrop of a staggering $16 billion bill backlog. Now today, the state owes about $6.5 billion to businesses, hospitals, and healthcare providers, among others. A little bit better, but not out of the woods yet. Here to talk about the state's multi-billion-dollar bill backlog is the person who cuts all the state's checks, Illinois Comptroller Susana Mendoza. Welcome back.
Thank you. Always great to be here.
All right, so the news of the day, the governor signs the legalized marijuana bill. What is that going to do for the budget?
So look, it's good news, of course, because any additional revenues that we can bring in are great. It's good news on multiple fronts, both from a fiscal perspective, but certainly from a moral perspective, with people being, decriminalizing marijuana and how that has impacted the war on drug has so negatively impacted people of color specifically, right? So all of these things are being turned around, but it's important to recognize that whatever new revenues come in from marijuana, even the best projections have the first year at around $57 million. It's certainly not even close to saying that the state's financial woes have gone up in smoke, right? So here's the deal. We owe $6.6 billion as of today to service providers across the state of Illinois. Even if we got the 10% of revenues that are going to be assigned to help with the bill backlog from marijuana revenues, that's only, with $57 million projected coming in, it's $5 million towards a $6.6 billion debt.
It's not even a proverbial drop in the bucket.
We have to be realistic. It's good. We'd rather have more money than less, but it certainly does not even come close to solving our problems.
So we mentioned the state's unpaid bills had piled up to $16 billion. It's down to $6 billion, although there's been a lot of borrowing to get it down. So what do you say to Illinois residents that are worried about running up a bunch of credit card bills?
Sure. I'd say, we've called it borrowing, but it's actually more like a refi. If I were to ask you, Paris, you have a home mortgage. If you're paying 12% on your mortgage payment today and I could refinance that for you at 3.5%, would you do it? You'd jump at it, right? Why? Because you'd be saving money over the course of that loan. The bonding deal that we did a year ago was absolutely good news for taxpayers. Why? Because we didn't just borrow money for the sake of borrowing. We borrowed money, $6 billion in bond authorization, in order to pay down bills that we were paying 12% interest on.
These were Medicaid bills?
Yep, primarily health care related bills. Some Medicaid
and what's
some others.
What's the interest on the borrowing?
We were paying about 12% interest, and now we're paying 3.5%. So over the course of that bond deal, which is a 12-year period, we will have saved taxpayers a net $4 to $6 billion by doing that deal. So anytime I can, utilize financial tools to actually save taxpayer dollars, that's what I'm going to do.
And there's another $1.2 billion of borrowing authorized in this current budget to get that backlog down to about $4.7 billion. What about that?
Yeah, so we appreciate the tool that the legislature has given us to be able to potentially go to the market with another $1.2 billion. But again, I will only do that if I can utilize those dollars to pay a much lower interest rate. So we're managing through this crisis right now. I mean, I'm very proud that we've brought down the bill backlog from a high of 16.7 to what is 6.6 today and save taxpayers money. But I don't want to go to the market unless if it's absolutely necessary.
So what does that mean for vendors that are owed money? How long are they waiting now?
Well, we've got most of our payments down to under 60 days. And there's still about $1.6 billion that we are paying late payment interest penalties on. But I've got some other financial tools. I can leverage borrowing from the state treasurer on some liquidity that he may have at 3.5% versus paying Wall Street 3.5%. So there's some financial tools that we're utilizing to save taxpayer money and be able to get some money back into the marketplace through paying our vendors. But we're not going to get out of this anytime soon. The devastation from the 736-day budget impasse is going to be felt still for years. It'll take us years to recover from it.
This is the impasse that occurred under the previous governor.
3 years without a budget, essentially, and more than 2 full years without a budget. And you had businesses closing their doors across the state of Illinois. Our job was to triage the state through that once I took office at the end of 2016.
Are there certain
but we've
businesses?
Still got a ways to go.
Are there certain businesses that get priority? Who gets paid first?
Sure. Well, I always start by prioritizing the most vulnerable, right? So besides our debt service payments, those are the loans that we've taken out, hard debt service that we owe so that our credit rating doesn't go down if we default on that. We always make our debt service payment. We make our pension payments. We prioritize Medicaid payments.
Can you give me a sense of how big the debt service payment is every year?
Oh, we have billions. I mean, billions of dollars in debt service, billions of dollars in pension payments. They make up the bulk of what our obligations are financially. Healthcare is another huge pool of money that goes out the door every single day. So, but when it comes to payments that I really don't have, that I do have discretion on, because I consider the Medicaid, I consider the pension and the hard debt, stuff that we have to pay, otherwise our credit rating automatically gets dinged. We can't afford that. But on the things that I do have prioritization authority on, I prioritize, first and foremost, any adult or child with disabilities or people who care for children and adults with disabilities, people in nursing homes, hospice care, and then education, because obviously those are like the key buckets of most vulnerable and best return on investment when it comes to education. So we've got a real moral compass directing our financial decisions in this office.
So the governor's called this budget kind of a bridge to getting a progressive income tax, which the voters will have to approve. Will the progressive income tax solve the bill backlog?
I think that the fair tax will absolutely go a long way in getting us additional revenues that are absolutely critically necessary to eliminate that bill backlog. I mean, without additional revenues that are earmarked for the bill backlog, all we're going to continue to do is triage that bill backlog. This budget, while it was the closest thing to a balanced budget that we've seen in a long time, I can't really call any budget truly balanced until we don't have a bill backlog. As long as we still have $6.5 billion and no new revenues to really make a big dent in that, I have to continue to do magic with the tools that I have, but there's only so much you can do.
Do you think lawmakers need to take another stab at pension reform?
I think pension reform is perhaps the one big ticket item that they didn't get to this year, but you know,
it didn't seem like a lot of political will to do that.
But it's asking a lot. Think about what was done in this budget season. I mean, they passed a $45 billion capital plan that is going to put thousands of people to work and fix our roads and bridges and, you know, create an economic engine for our state across every region of our state. They passed legalization of marijuana, which was signed today, which will bring in additional revenues. There was an expansion of gaming. There was an actual budget. Let's talk about the fact that, oh my goodness, we actually have a budget, and it was a bipartisan crafted budget. There are so many amazingly huge lifts that were all done in the first 5 months of this new governor that the only thing essentially they didn't get to was pension. You got to leave the guy something to do.
Would you advocate for the Cullerton model consideration where you choose higher raises versus higher retirement pay?
Look, I think what you need to do is pass something that's not going to be struck down by the courts. And what that magic pill is, I don't know. I think that's the really the billion-dollar question here. But you can't do anything that would diminish or impair those benefits. Otherwise, all of that work will be for naught. They've tried it time and time again. The courts have struck it down. We've got to just get serious about dealing with this pension issue without taking away people's earned benefits.
The credit rating agencies are saying that the budget outlook for Illinois is stable. Does that mean Illinois can get lower interest rates?
So we're hoping, I mean, whenever we go to the market, we want to be able to capture the best possible rate. When we get that 3.5 rate on the $6 billion, like I said, it's saving us $4 to $6 billion. But until our credit gets better, you know, accessing credit is going to be more expensive. You know what I get excited about, Paris, these days? The most exciting thing for me is the thought of a credit upgrade. I've discussed this with Governor Pritzker. We have to get excited about getting Illinois in a better fiscal footing, and a credit upgrade on our watch would really be a sign that things are moving absolutely in the right direction.
Last time we talked to you, you were really excited about running for mayor of Chicago. You didn't make the runoff. Was there anything you felt you should have done differently?
Look, I gave it my best shot. Most importantly, I stepped up when things are the hardest in Chicago. You know, I'm the kind of person who, the bigger the challenge, the more I want to be a part of finding a solution to a problem. So I have no regrets. I gave it my best shot. It would have been much worse for me to have lived with the what if the rest of my life, right? So, you know, the what is of losing that night was certainly nowhere near as bad as the what if would have been. And at the end of the day, like in Chicago and in other parts of this state, in every region, every single day, there are people who have way bigger problems than losing an election. So I don't look back, I only look forward, and I've got my hands full at the comptroller's office, and I'm proud of the job we're doing.
Was that election all about Ed Burke?
That election, oh, what do you mean, like? Just
the outcome. I mean, Ed Burke was dominating the news cycles.
I think that was a huge distraction for others. For me, my focus was always on putting forth a platform of how to move the city forward.
But do you feel like you were unfairly connected to Burke because of your past association?
For sure. I feel that like my record in a way was absolutely glossed over when, you know, I have an absolute incredibly proud record to stand on and credentials to put forth for Chicago. But you know, that's neither here nor there. Voters made a choice, and I respect their choice, and I have, you know, put forth with all of my best heart and soul my desire to work with Mayor Lightfoot. I wish her the best, and I'm here and standing ready to work with her on moving Chicago and our state forward.
And I remember you did become a supporter of Mayor Lightfoot. I saw you at the campaign rally. All right, Comptroller Susana Mendoza, thank you as always for being here.
My pleasure. Thanks so much.
And there's more Chicago tonight just ahead, so please stay with us.
This evening's presentation of Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by ComEd, powering lives.
We have a tremendous source of untapped, efficient energy right here in our school. Let her rip, Jenny.
I kind of love this idea.
The ComEd Energy Efficiency Program has real ideas for making schools energy efficient.
Pedal faster.
Still to come on Chicago Tonight, there's renewed attention on the issue of slavery reparations. What exactly would they look like? More tips from organic gardener Jeannie Nolan on how to get the best out of your vegetable garden, especially amid all this rain. A new study shows that dogs match the stress of their owners. That and more stories from the world of science. And how more than 500,000 Lego bricks came together to help Morton Arboretum visitors connect with nature. But first, President Trump has given Democrats 2 weeks to approve more funding for border protection before his threat of widespread deportations could begin in Chicago and other cities. That comes as Mayor Lori Lightfoot terminated ICE access to police databases in anticipation of immigration raids starting last weekend. Here to discuss potential immigration raids in Chicago and President Trump's immigration policies in general are Gabe Gonzalez with the group Protect Rogers Park and Carl Segvich, Chicago's 11th Ward Republican committeeman. Welcome both of you to Chicago Tonight. First, Mr. Gonzalez, what is the reaction from the Latino community and the immigration community on President Trump's threats and then the pullback of his threats?
Well, it's important to remember, first off, that immigration just doesn't affect Latinos, that there's a broad immigration community or immigrant community in the Chicagoland area. And in general, I think there's a certain amount of fear among people who are undocumented and people who live with and love undocumented people. And I also think that there's a certain amount of anger at being used as what they see as a political pawn by a bully in the White House.
Mr. Segvich, was this a political statement that the president made that he just didn't follow up on, or do you believe that he will eventually enforce this increased deportation?
I'm a Republican conservative soldier here to hold his feet to the fire. So I don't know what he is planning. I do not trust him completely. So we are here as conservatives to hold his feet to the fire. And now we have 2 more weeks. We're disappointed that he backed down the other day with the ICE raids.
Mr. Gonzalez, what do you think of Congress moving toward $4.5 billion in aid to sort of help the situation at the border and some of those detention centers? Should the president sign that?
We at Protect RP really focus on what's happening in the city of Chicago and what's happening with our neighbors. We think that any policies that lessen fear among the undocumented community, lessen fear among the immigrant community in general, are good policies. I think that the issue at the border, personally, I think that the issue of the border is a fabricated issue created by the president and his administration in order to win votes. And I think that it's unfortunate that people are being used like that.
Mr. Segvich, would you advocate the president sign this aid bill that Congress is debating?
He should sign whatever protects the citizens of the United States of America. What is the best strategy to protect our citizens? People tend to forget that our Constitution was written to protect citizens of America, not foreign invasions from illegal aliens.
Still, there is a constitutional process when there are immigrants in the country that might be undocumented. They go through a court process. Yeah. What about the backlog of court cases?
I mean, I think that the problem here fundamentally is, well, among other things, a complete misreading of the Constitution. But beyond that, really the question is, what kind of country do we want to have? And I think that when you look at the values of a place like the city of Chicago and the Chicagoland area, what we believe is that we should be a welcoming community and that people have the right to live free of fear and in the way that they choose as long as they don't harm others. And rhetoric that dehumanizes people or that otherwise, you know, words like invasion, I think misrepresent the issue and misrepresent what's going on in our community.
Speaking of rhetoric, Mr. Segvich, what about the whole issue of using the term concentration camps to describe some of the conditions in these facilities? Is that overwrought?
It's outrageous to use the term concentration camps. Everyone knows that we as a country treat everybody humanely. Even the people who are illegally invading our country.
But the reports are pretty clear that those conditions are not humane. I mean, unsanitary unhealthy conditions. I mean, I'm just going the reports that have been on the ground. And there's a lot of upheaval in Customs and Border Protection. I want to move on to the issue of Chicago being a sanctuary city. What does that practically mean?
Well, I think fundamentally what it means and what it needs to mean, and what we're very grateful for the leadership of people like Mayor Lightfoot is that it's a place where people can live without fear. If you think about some of the basic tenets of our country, I mean, if you think of Norman Rockwell, did a series of paintings about the 4 freedoms, one of which was a freedom from fear. And that was a basic tenet in his view and of people who supported things like Rockwell's view of America about what kind of country we should have. At Protect RP, we work to make sure that our neighbors can live free of fear, fear that men with guns are going to show up and separate them from their families. What's going on in the border is unconscionable. It's un-American, it's unrepresentative of our country, and what Mayor Lightfoot has done, as well as a number of elected leaders. I live in Rogers Park. Our alderwoman, Maria Haddon, our state rep, Kelly Cassidy, our state senator, Heather Staines, our congresswoman, Jan Schakowsky, all of these women have stood with us because they know that our community welcomes immigrants and doesn't really care what kind of piece of paper they have in their pocket.
Mr. Segovich, Mayor Lightfoot says she wants to cut off ICE having any access to CPD databases. What do you think about that?
Title 8 of our United States Immigration Code, Section 1373, clearly states that any government official or entity, federal, state, local, must comply with any other municipal government, federal, state, local, regarding any communication on any person here lawfully or unlawfully. She is obstructing justice. She is supposed to be arrested for obstruction of justice. But we are living in a post-constitutional climate here in the United States for some years now, post-Christian and post-constitutional. President John Adams once said, "Our Constitution was only written for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate for the government of any other people." We are living in chaos right now.
Mr. Gonzalez, is Mayor Lightfoot's move symbolic? I mean, does it really mean that the Chicago Police Department won't cooperate with ICE? Because other federal agencies do get access to those databases.
I think that a lot of that depends on the leadership inside CPD. So it's very clear what the mayor has laid out and what the expectations are. How that is demonstrated by leadership at the top down to the district level, like in Rogers Park District 24, that's going to determine what happens. And I think that starts at the top, and I welcome the efforts of Mayor Lightfoot and anybody who's willing to help protect the undocumented in our city.
Mr. Segovich, the president ties higher crime rates to a city like Chicago to sanctuary city status. Is there any empirical evidence backing that claim up?
Sure. We have 3 million people incarcerated in this country. 33%, 1 million, are illegal aliens. It should come to about 1 out of 15, 1 out of 20, but 1 out of 3 incarcerated people in this country are illegal aliens. And we don't know how many more illegal aliens
What's
are
that
on the
based
crimes.
on? Where's that from?
Look it up, look at the crime statistics, federal and local.
So the number's accurate, but the reason the number's accurate is because they're being detained at the border. What you're doing is you're conflating crime with being detained at the border, and you're saying that's all the same thing. It's not the same thing. And let's be clear. Do some undocumented immigrants cause crime or commit crimes? Certainly. So do some native-born Americans. And you know why? Because they're people. Undocumented are people, and native-born Americans are people, and immigrants who come here lawfully are people. We in Rogers Park recognize they're all people, and they all deserve to be treated like people.
Mr.
Absolutely,
Segovich,
absolutely.
Mr. Segovich, the Tribune editorial board, it's a little right of center, says that sanctuary protections actually do help crime fighting because they encourage immigrants, no matter their status, to come forward and help police instead of scare them into the shadows. Is there any truth to that?
I disagree with the premise that any media in any big city is right-leaning. So I disagree with your foundation.
Well, they would describe themselves
and if
that
I was
way.
If I was going to go along with your foundation, no, it's still an obscene argument. It's outrageous. Law and order. This country was built on law and order, assimilation.
So
Foreigners are welcome to come here legally. It takes paperwork, not jumping over a border.
It's all about legality. So in the 1800s, you would have then defended slavery because that was legal in the 1800s. In the 1910s, you would have defended the fact that women couldn't vote because that was the law. Is that what you're saying, that legality trumps humanity?
No, we are a country of laws, not a country of men. That means that no man, illegal alien, specifically here, is above the law.
Gentlemen, these are larger philosophical discussions that would take a long time, but we are out of time. So Gabe Gonzalez, Carl Segovich, thank you both for being here.
You're more than welcome.
Thank you.
And up next, reparations. Should African Americans be compensated for the legacy of slavery? Should African Americans receive reparation payments for slavery and civil rights abuses? That is a question that's been revived in recent weeks thanks to a resolution in Congress to study the issue. It no doubt spurs an emotional reaction from all sides, but some lawmakers, notably U.S. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, says he believes reparations are not needed.
I don't think reparations for something that happened 150 years ago for whom none of us currently living are responsible is a good idea. We've tried to deal with our original sin of slavery by fighting a civil war, by passing landmark civil rights legislation. We've elected an African-American president. I think we're always a work in progress in this country, but no one currently alive was responsible for that.
Joining us to discuss the different potential models for reparations and the debate around them is Alvin Tillery, political science professor at Northwestern University and director of the school's Center for the Study of Diversity and Democracy. Welcome to Chicago Tonight.
Thank you, Paris.
First of all, how long has the idea of reparations for African Americans been around?
Well, the idea is as old as slavery itself. I mean, you had slaves challenging their status who would ask for freedom and also compensation for years served. In a formal capacity in terms of government action, of course, Sherman's famous Special Field Order 15 from 1865 really set in motion the notion that slaves should be compensated directly with the lands of their former masters in South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida.
And why do you believe it's getting renewed attention now?
Well, I think there are really a couple of reasons. One, and probably foremost, is that the power of the Obama coalition of young urban whites, African Americans, Latinos, Asian Americans is ascendant in a Democratic primary cycle. And there's no doubt that that coalition has demonstrated its ability to elect presidents. And so that's the one reason. The second reason is that we have much better history and social science data showing the bright line connection between slavery and current racial inequalities in our society.
What are the different shapes that potential reparations packages could take?
Well, I mean, there's something of a debate as to whether the reparations should be targeted for slavery and the legatees of slavery generally. Should it be targeted to persons who experienced Jim Crow and have survived the legacy of Jim Crow? Or should it be a sort of a result of living in a discriminatory society that sort of undervalues and devalues blackness? And I think what we saw with H.R. 40 is the desire to study slavery and slavery's long-term effects.
H.R. 40, you're referring to, that's the resolution from Congress to study this whole issue.
It's the Judiciary Committee in the House of Representatives bill to get a commission to study the effects and to put forward proposals.
Does reparations mean direct payments to people, or is there another form?
That is one model, and that is one model that a lot of people advocate. It would be a direct cash transfer. And sort of that cash would sort of have the impact of sort of having a multiplier effect in African American communities and the communities that sort of subsume them. And so that is one model. Other models are funds for development of these communities. And then there are other proposals like tax holidays. For example, if you were an African American who lived in the Jim Crow era and you weren't able to go to the state school, University of Alabama, University of Mississippi, and you're in the workforce, you're paying tax dollars that subsidize the educations of whites in a completely segregated system. And so the notion of blacks as sort of sucking up tax dollars of white people is frankly the misnomer. It's actually more the reverse.
And there still exists a pretty big income divide, or a median income divide.
Yeah, about $25,000.
Yeah, between Caucasian Americans, African Americans. What are ways to go about addressing that problem?
Well, I mean, I think, the reparations, a cash transfer would not necessarily sort of fix the income divide, but it would work to fix the wealth divide. And so the upper end of that reparations proposal, something on the order of $5 trillion, that would amount giving sort of close to a cash payment that would bring African Americans up close to the median wealth of white Americans, right? And so that would have all kinds of positive effects on the African American community. It might end hyper-policing. It might, sort of lead to greater attraction of business development. And though some who oppose direct cash transfers, like Bernie Sanders, say that we can do all of that work through focusing on development and investment in the black community, and that would lead to the positive outcomes.
To that end, we had Lonnie Bunch on this show last week. He's the founder of the Smithsonian African American History Museum. Let's play a clip really quickly about what he said on the subject of reparations.
I really think that we should spend money on education, creating opportunities for the next generation of African American students, kids in the inner city. So I'm not sure that I'm going to say I want reparations, but what I really want is the recognition that the generations of discrimination still shape the way people live.
Is a reparations package more palatable if you sell it like Lonnie Bunch said, as money for education, as opposed to direct cash transfers?
Well, I'm not sure about that. I mean, I respect Mr. Bunch immensely. I mean, he's a legend in my field, and I'm thrilled that he's going to lead the Smithsonian. But the reality is that's why we need H.R. 40, is to study what the impact of these different proposals would be in transforming this community that was shaped by government action driven by racism.
We have to mention, I mean, there have been reparations in the past in this country for Japanese Americans and Holocaust survivors. Why do you think that this one is so much tougher to get?
The entire foundation, the fabric of our society is built on slavery. All of the monuments of freedom, the White House, the Congress in Washington, D.C., are built by slaves. And for 100 years between the passage of the 15th Amendment and the end of our racial dictatorship in 1968, we passed off the myth that all this happened because black Americans were undeserving or unworthy. And so unworking the sort of damage of that white supremacist logic, which is really fundamentally at the heart of our society, is very emotionally destabilizing for a lot of people.
All right, Professor Alvin Tillery, thank you for being here and sharing your knowledge with us.
Thank you, Paris.
And on to our next story. You don't need me to tell you that it's rained a lot recently. That means a lot of gardens might be underwater. Last Friday, Jeannie Nolan stopped by to check in on our WTTW organic garden and further my severely deficient gardening education. Here's what we found. So Jeannie Nolan, we had some farmers on the show the other day that say they are really struggling. They have not been able to plant in their soil. Some of them are trying to plant right now, which is really late. Are we seeing the same kind of problems with gardeners?
We definitely are. It very much depends on the conditions in which your individual garden is growing, but because of this huge amount of rain, record-breaking, and really low temperatures for spring, we're sort of all waiting for it to warm up consistently. Some gardens are really suffering.
And the soil is really wet in a lot of gardens. Tell us why that makes it so difficult to
plant. So, although some gardens are struggling,
this
garden is thriving.
Yeah.
And it is really thriving for two reasons. One, this is an 18-inch high raised bed, so the soil has really good drainage. So even with all this rain, it's not compacting the soil and removing the air from the soil. We want air in there. The rain is moving through. The other factor is we get almost full sun here all day. more like a farm.
So we're in a strategically good
We
spot.
are. It's a little microclimate with the building. So what I'm seeing here with the basil and the peppers at my home garden, my plants are a third the size and they're struggling. So these look really good in this garden.
If you have a raised garden, you can kind of mitigate the effects of all of this rain and cool weather?
To some extent, not completely. But so far this garden is really doing well.
Talk about climate change.
Right.
Do you think climate change, is there evidence to suggest, just from a gardening standpoint, that climate change is happening?
Completely. The past few seasons, we're just seeing like a blurring of the lines from spring, summer to fall. And in some cases, we're able to put crops in earlier than usual or later. And it's unpredictable. That's really the kind of main thing we're seeing with climate change is we can't count on what we've been able to count on in the past.
And what we're looking at here is our salsa garden. So tell us some of the things that we're growing.
Right, so we have some hot peppers, serrano, jalapeno, some sweet peppers, an orange and a red sweet pepper. We've got red onions, scallions, cilantro, really good.
I'm glad they're not matria because I do not want to try that pepper
on
air.
You don't have to do that. And then tomatoes and tomatillo.
Okay,
so
gotcha.
We're in good shape.
All right, let's move over to our
very good,
more mature looking garden over here.
So this bed is full of crops that were planted primarily on May 1st.
Okay.
Okay, so these are cool.
About a 6-week growth cycle?
That's right, 6, 7. These are cool weather crops. Sometimes we plant these crops as early as April 15th. But again, this year we were so delayed. May 1st is considered a bit late, but it's worked out well.
And does this soil look as good as the
it sure does.
bed?
Yeah,
Again,
everything is
raised.
doing well. That's right. Like right here, we've had excellent germination on our cucumbers. These will eventually fill the cage and have a lot of fruit. But in some gardens, the cucumber germination really has not been good. So it drains so well here that our seed did well.
All right, so right here you have some broccoli.
That's
you have some
right.
tips on how to really successfully harvest this.
I really do. So broccoli is one of my favorite crops to grow. I call the plant a generous plant because we're going to harvest the head, but we're going to leave the plant in, and it's going to continue to produce florets that we can use for stir fries, and you know, for at least another month, maybe even longer, we will continue to harvest. The head is small. If we left it another 4 or 5 days, it would get bigger, but I'm here today, so we're gonna do this. The thing that I like to teach people is when you harvest broccoli, you wanna use a knife, you're gonna cut into the stem, but you wanna cut on a pretty severe angle. The reason you wanna do that is sometimes this area develops a hole and fills with water and rots the stem quickly. So if you cut that on an angle when you do your whole head, it really helps make the plant last longer. You'll get more side shoots and be eating broccoli longer.
So you're saying there's going to be little florets popping up?
Yep, these are actually in each of these little, sort of the armpit of each leaf, you're going to have a little piece of broccoli growing.
Wow.
Yeah, and it keeps going. It's a very generous plant.
Looks nutritious and delicious.
Exactly.
Okay, now so we have a colored
a purple cauliflower will come around here. Now, unlike the broccoli that was sort of this, it continues, cauliflower is really a one and done. So with this, we actually are going to pull the whole plant. Now again, if we waited a little longer, it would be quite a bit bigger, but we're going to pull it today. And I do encourage people to harvest their veggies young rather than missing and waiting too long. But with this, we're actually pulling the whole plant, and this is an important lesson for gardeners. The soil on here is what gardeners call black gold. It really matters. You don't want to just pull a plant and take it away. You actually want to attempt to leave as much soil as possible that's on the roots in the garden.
So it's very valuable.
It's very valuable. And sometimes there's, you know, the really good microbes and little insects in the soil right around the roots. There's a little worm there. We want all of that in our garden.
But you're pulling this from the root because
That's
this is one and done. Because the broccoli still has some life left in it.
And then we just crank our leaves down.
Ooh.
And there we go.
Perfect cut.
Our purple cauliflower.
There you have it. And Jeannie will be back in the next few weeks for some more gardening tips. And up next to the world of science with paleontologist Neil Shubin.
Don't ever miss Chicago Tonight. Subscribe to our podcast. Get a daily download of our show delivered to your desktop or mobile device. Go to WTTW.com/Chicago Tonight Podcast and subscribe.
Citizen scientists track foxes and coyotes, how brushing your teeth could help prevent Alzheimer's, and a new study out of Sweden finds that dogs have stress levels to match their owners. All those stories and more as University of Chicago paleontologist Neil Shubin returns to once again help us make sense of some of the latest research making headlines in the world of science. Neil Shubin, thank you so much for being back here.
Great to be here again.
So this first story, a team at the U of I is trying to track citizen scientists as they track coyotes and foxes. What's the point of this?
So we have millions of eyeballs out there and people seeing coyotes and foxes. We see birds and so forth. Citizen scientists are all about recording those observations of what they see in nature. And there are apps that help them record them. The question is, how reliable are those observations that citizen scientists make? And that's what this study was about.
And so, as I understand, there's a control group. They're putting GPS signals on some of the coyotes and foxes just to see if it matches up with what the citizen scientists are finding.
That's correct. What they did is they took telemetry. They followed foxes and coyotes with GPS and radio tagging, and they recorded where they were and where they spent their time, and then they compared that to the observations that citizen scientists made using their apps on their smartphones.
And why are these results important?
This is important because it shows how reliable these results are. Because citizen science is free, it's cheap, and it's crowdsourced. So there are so many observations that are possible. The questions are, is it biased or not? And where it is biased is they tended to err on the side of making observations more frequently in places where there's human-animal contact, as you'd imagine, near trash and so forth.
And what were the citizen scientists tracking about foxes and coyotes?
They were simply tracking their occurrence, where they were and when and where they were at any given time. And so when they mapped those to the telemetry, it turned out that about 65% of the time that citizen scientists were correct.
And as we know, coyotes have really adopted Chicago as a hometown for them.
They're everywhere. It's amazing.
They're in urban areas. Okay, let's move on to the next story. Researchers in Norway have found a link between gum disease and Alzheimer's. What is that link?
Yeah, so gingivitis is caused by a bacterium, and this bacterium makes a protein which can destroy cells. The scientists found that this bacterium and this protein can be transferred into the brain, and they can have deleterious effects on the nervous system. And so it turns out that people who have gingivitis have higher rates of Alzheimer's.
So the point here is to floss and brush your teeth if you already weren't doing that.
Yeah, when your dentist yells at you for not flossing, please listen to them, because the other diseases are related to this as well. Heart disease, certain types of cancers, in particular esophageal cancer, and so forth.
So over what period of time can this bacteria migrate to the brain and cause erosion of the cells up there?
Well, you need a fairly severe case of gingivitis for it to happen. So you need a fairly substantial load of these bacterium to make a difference. And so this bacterium alone is not going to cause Alzheimer's, but it's a contributing risk factor to the disease. So it can happen over a period of years, yeah.
Wow, okay. Next story, dogs mirror the stress levels of owners according to a new study out of Sweden. Why is that?
So when we're stressed, we have a protein that goes into our bloodstream called cortisol, and that ends up in our hair. And what the scientists did is they looked at the levels of cortisol in the hair of pet owners and compared it to their dogs. And it turns out high levels of cortisol, which correspond to stress, are seen to map between the owners and their pets.
So is it just that the dogs are mimicking the emotions of their owners?
Yeah, when we're stressed, our pets are feeling that stress as well.
What is the physiology going on within the dog?
Yeah, so what happens is when...
Well, you talked about the cortisol.
The cortisol is secreted by their bloodstream. So they're obviously seeing some cues off their owners. And those cues can be anything from their owners ignoring them to the owners raising their voices loudly. So all of these behaviors we exhibit with our pets are noticed.
So as I understand, if someone's pretty neurotic, just naturally their dog is going to become neurotic too.
Well, what's interesting here is really interesting is that the more neurotic the individual was, and they gave them personality tests before they recorded their stress levels, the less stressed their dogs were.
Really?
That was a surprise. And so the researchers were sort of surprised by that result. One interpretation, one speculation they had is perhaps people who are more neurotic on the scale looked to their pets for comfort and maybe gave their pets more attention, which helped to reduce the stress of their pets.
But in terms of other emotions, sadness, elation, dogs kind of mirror that?
No, none of that really. It was really the stress that made a big difference.
Stress.
Yeah, they're really good at picking that up.
Okay, another study done out of the University of Chicago's Marine Biological Laboratory studied all of the muscle movements and nerve movements in an aquatic animal. Why is this important?
How do animals move? How does the brain and the nervous system control movement? That's a central question for us. When you think about walking or talking or thinking, how does the nervous system control that? What scientists at the Marine Biological Laboratory did is they looked at a little animal called a hydra. It's about 1 millimeter long. They're really beautiful when you see them swim around. And you can see them on the screen right here. There's a hydra. It's a tiny little thing, a few millimeters long. And you see it stained green and red. Those are the muscles. And this dance it does where it elongates and contracts and bends and twists and turns, that's produced by these muscles acting in concert. One set of muscles on the outside you see in green, another set of muscles on the inside in red. And what happens here is an amazing dance. Look at that creature there. It moves about, but the nerves aren't controlling all that motion. The nerves are really just a little trigger. It's the interaction of the muscles themselves that are controlling this dance.
And so what's the significance of being able to map the full body muscle contractions and the nervous system activity in this hydra?
As the researchers describe it, what they're trying to get after is the neural code. How does the nervous system cause complex movements? That's a central question of biology, because once we have answers to that, we can begin to really think about how the brain controls even more complex things than creatures like us.
All right. Final story here. A study out of Princeton. Researchers have discovered that learned behaviors get genetically encoded and passed down to the next generation. How does that work?
Isn't that wild? So these little worms called Caenorhabditis elegans, again, they're really tiny, they're a few millimeters long, they learn to avoid certain bacterium. They eat bacteria. But some of those bacteria, here you can see one of the worms right now, some of the bacteria that these creatures eat attract them, but they make them sick. Turns out what happens is when the animal gets sick, a chain chemical reaction happens inside the body of a mother, that it could pass this learned behavior not to eat this bacterium onto its offspring for 4 generations.
And then, as I read, something weird happened in the 5th generation for some reason.
They lose the memory. And the reason for that is sometimes it's beneficial to eat these bacterium, sometimes it's not. So sometimes it's good to learn to avoid them, sometimes you don't want to avoid them, sometimes you want to eat them.
So what's the process of taking a learned behavior and then encoding it in the genetic code and just passing it on to your offspring?
We're just beginning to understand that. What these creatures have is in their genome small little molecules called small RNAs. And it's those little molecules that are passed on from generation to generation that are eventually lost by the 5th generation. But they're the ones that cause the memory.
And does this happen in other animals, other species, humans?
We don't know. We know some examples in other worm-like creatures, and there are a few other examples in some other mammals like voles and things like that. But the real question is, how general is this? Can these kinds of biological memories be passed on from generation to generation?
And hasn't science been looking at this for a long time?
For a long time, but we haven't had the tools. We haven't had the molecular tools to really get at the genomic tools to understand the DNA and the RNA. Now we have the chemical ability to dissect all this.
All right. Well, Neil Shubin, thank you for dissecting all these stories from the world of science with us, as usual. And we'll see you next time.
Oh, thank you.
And we're back with more right after this.
Coverage of science and technology on Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Joel M. Friedman, president of the Alvin H. Baum Family Fund.
The Morton Arboretum in Lisle works to help visitors make connections with the natural world. A new exhibition aims to do just that, one brick at a time. We recently brought you this story. Here's Jay Shefsky with another look.
Those are Lego bricks, to be exact. More than 500,000 of them across 15 different displays that make up Nature Connects. Sarah Sargent, manager of interpretation and exhibits, says it connects directly to the Arboretum.
It has, with the exception of the peacock, some creatures that people might see as they're walking around our grounds.
The peacock and the 14 other Lego sculptures are the creation of New York-based artist Sean Kenny, who describes himself as a professional kid. The displays at the Arboretum range in size from a monarch butterfly on a milkweed plant that's close to 7 feet tall, down to a woodpecker just under 2 feet tall that sometimes has real-life counterparts nearby.
We asked for a pileated woodpecker because we have 1,700 acres here, and pileated woodpeckers are the largest species of woodpecker in North America. They like a range, and so you will occasionally see them in the east woods. We have a bee for our pollinator gardens. And we have an acorn that's sprouting an oak sapling.
And that sapling isn't just a sight to behold. It's also a nod to Morton's mission.
Oaks are especially important to the Illinois ecosystem, but of course we've lost a lot of our native ecosystems over the centuries, and so now we're interested in restoration and conservation. So not only are our scientists looking at how to conserve and restore oak forests here, but they're working with scientists around the globe to restore native species of oaks in other habitats in Mexico and China.
The 15 different displays took artist Kenny and his team some 4,500 hours to build, the equivalent of more than 6 months of work.
It's really something that you can't describe until you've seen a peacock or a monarch butterfly made out of Legos that's taller than you are. You really haven't lived.
While putting the displays together was quite an undertaking, visitors to the Arboretum can see them all by foot in about an hour. For Chicago Tonight, I'm Jay Shefsky.
Nature Connects is scheduled to be on display at the Morton Arboretum until September 15th. And that is our show for this Tuesday night. Join us tomorrow night, live at 7. Cook County Assessor Fritz Kagi will be here to talk about why some property tax assessments are skyrocketing right now, and tour the Southeast Side production facility for the CTA's next generation of train cars. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you for watching. Good night.
Closed captioning for this program is brought to you by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, serving Chicago as a personal injury law firm since 1984.